Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan is away on military leave right now, so we're going to bring back some of our previous shows that didn't make it to the podcast. We hope that you enjoy them. As always, we welcome your feedback. If you'd like a written transcript of the show, please email me at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, at mail, MAIL, .wvu.edu, or call 304-234-3673. Thanks again for listening. Do you have questions about the COVID-19 vaccination? Do you want to know who can get it, where to get it, or do you have general questions about COVID-19 vaccines? Vaccinate.wv.gov has the info you are looking for. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 Vaccine Info Line to talk to a representative and find out more at 1-833-734-0965. Again, that's VACCINATE.wv.gov or 1-833-734-0965 to get your COVID-19 vaccination questions answered. This message was brought to you by the WVU Extension Service.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was feeding hay in the meadow and pasture to manage your soil fertility. So, when you're thinking about putting your animals out into pasture this winter, a lot of people in this area have separate hay fields and pasture fields. Now, partially this is due to, the hay field is the only flat area that you can actually harvest hay off of, and so the animals get the steeper areas. Another thing is that maybe you don't have enough fencing to keep them in a hay field, and, fencing is a pretty expensive investment. So that's one of the things that keeps people from pasturing their hay fields. But then there's this misconception that by letting the animals graze in your pasture field, you're actually going to increase your weed pressure. And that really isn't true, because a lot of times if you do it right and you time it right, then the animals will eat more of the weeds before they can get strong enough to go to seed. And so that would be your goal there. So there's a couple different strategies you can do to decrease your weed pressure in those hay fields, but that's not really what I want to talk about today. Today I want to talk about increasing the nutrients in those hay fields before they become nutrient deficient, and thus you get more weed pressure. So this is kind of step one in reducing weed pressure in the hay field. And so when you think about nutrient cycling, or when you think about winter feeding, I want you to think about nutrient cycling. So when it comes to pastures and grasses, poop is good food. We don't typically think of poop as good food, but for plants, really it is. It has a lot of great nutrients in it, and it's going to help those plants grow better and also improve the microbiota that are in the soil by keeping them well fed as well. But there is a balancing act. So if you have a winter feed pad, say a lower area where you put the animals in the winter to make sure that they aren't ruining all of your good pastures, you have your waste field, then typically these are in lower areas, and typically they're going to be more subject to flooding, but also all of the moisture that we've been getting all summer is going down through the soil layers and coming into that lower field. So you're going to have an even bigger mud problem simply because water rolls downhill and it is going to land in that lower feed pad area. So if you traditionally feed in a lower area, I want you to consider maybe putting some bales out into different fields and spreading them out. But let's start with the basics, okay? Our extension specialist, Ed Rayburn, has recommended the following steps for managing your pastures and your hay fields, specifically for soil fertility. So basically using the animals to feed the soil. So step one, always, is soil test. All right, so you want to soil test all of the meadows and the pastures to determine their fertility status every 3 to 5 years. Now, this is important to do it on a regular basis, but it's also important to do it correctly. So you want to make sure when you are sampling those pasture fields that you're not going down 8 inches into the soil. So if you happen to have your own soil probe, or you're using a soil probe that the conservation district has or that I have, you have to remember that with the depth of that soil probe does not mean that should be the depth of your soil sample. You really don't want to go any deeper than 4 inches for a pasture field. You can even go as shallow as 2 inches for a well-managed pasture field. And the reason for this is that by going deeper into the soil for that soil test, you're actually going to be pulling up a lot of soil that you don't need to fertilize. It's not in the active root zone of the plant, but also it's not in the area where the nutrients that you apply to the surface of the field are going to get to anytime soon. So, for instance, phosphorus and manure, they're very good at binding to the soil particles in our area. So what they're going to do is they're going to bind to those top 2 inches of soil, and maybe they'll get down to that 3rd or 4th inch, but they're not good. It's going to take them a couple years to get down lower than those 4 inches. So that isn't something that you are actively managing. So you shouldn't be sampling it because you're going to be spending a lot more on fertilizer that you don't need. And if you would like to just throw about $50 to $100 an acre more into something that could be potentially damaging to the environment or just completely wasted, you can just throw that my way, and I'll take that from you. But you want to make sure that you're not wasting your money, and also you want to make sure you're not wasting your time. So when you take a soil sample, make sure it's only in that 2 to 4 inch depth range. You don't want to go any deeper than 4 inches. All right, so you're going to soil sample every 3 to 5 years. Now, if you have a property that your pH is way off and you're really putting a lot of lime on and you're really adjusting that soil, you're adding a lot of nutrients, you're going to want to test that particular plot every year. So it all depends on what the management needs of that particular paddock are. But you do want to make sure you separate the paddock samples. So if you have, say, 4 paddocks on your land, you want to send in 4 completely separate soil samples because each of those paddocks probably has different management, meaning you're going to have the animals in it at a different time of the year. You're going to maybe not have animals in it at all. So you want to make sure that you are sampling each of those paddock areas completely separately and sending in a separate soil sample for each one. That's going to help you learn how to better manage those nutrients all around the farm and manage your farm as one entity that is helping itself over time. Okay, the next thing you want to do is you want to try to feed hay in those meadows, in your hay meadows. So feed hay where you took the hay off. And that's going to return the nutrients that are taken out through that hay harvest and help build your soil fertility. So your goal is to get your soil fertility into the optimum range. And if all you're doing is harvesting hay and never putting anything back into that soil, you're going to watch the nutrient value of that hay degrade over time. So every year you pull hay off without putting something back, your hay is going to have fewer nutrients for your livestock, and they're going to be eating more Cheetos or more empty calories than you really want them to. And you're going to have to supplement that with more grain, which is more money out of your pocket. So let's let the land and the animals do some extra work for you and help your farm maintain its good income level. Next thing you want to look at is if you have pastures that are poor fertility, then that's also where you want to feed hay. So basically, if you have a particular pasture that's really high in nutrients, that's not where you want to be feeding hay. Unless you're going to be scraping it and taking that manure somewhere else on the farm, you're creating a potentially dangerous area where you're going, not dangerous, but you're going to be creating too much, so a toxicity of nutrients, and that is going to also degrade the quality of that pasture ground and potentially cause an environmental impact where you are losing a lot of that phosphorus into the groundwater, which is something we definitely want to avoid, and we don't want it washing off into our streams. So we're going to try to manage where we put our animals as into an area where the soil needs those animals. Now, ideally, we want to feed 50 feet away from our fence lines, our water tanks, and our windbreaks. And you want to feed 100 feet away from streams and 200 feet away from household wells or springs. Okay, so I know that some of you have pretty small farms, and it's kind of difficult to get those big barriers. But I will tell you that those are really important numbers. 50 feet away from your fence lines is going to save you time and effort by reducing the amount of growth that's happening right up around your fence line. So it's going to help protect that area and save you a little bit of effort. But it's also going to prevent your animals' nutrients, we'll call them, from maybe washing down the hill into your neighbor's crop field. So that's something that you want to prevent as well, especially if they're growing leafy greens or things that touch the soil as they grow. You definitely don't want your raw manure rolling into their field. So you do need to be a good neighbor and help to prevent that by creating that buffer zone. Other things you can do to help maybe reduce the size of that buffer zone is to increase the quantity of vegetation. So more grasses, taller grasses, maybe a little bit of shrubbery. Those things can also help to catch any nutrient runoff. But you have to be careful because once you get a lot of overstory in there, you're going to reduce the understory, and you're still going to have that pass-through area. So tall grasses are really the best buffer zone between a pasture field and water. Now, you're saying, but it's so expensive to put fencing in. I can't afford to fence my animals away from this stream. It's their water source, and it is just cost prohibitive for me to fence this stream out that runs through the middle of my property. And to that, I will say, perhaps you can't afford not to fence that stream out. You know, when cattle feed next to a stream and just stand in the water and drink, that is the number one way that they transmit diseases to each other and to their young. So if your animals are in a stream area, you know, that is really detrimental to the health of the animals. And there are a lot of cost share programs that can help you install fencing around those streams and also install alternative watering systems so that you still have a nice clean water area for your animals, but you're not allowing them to transmit diseases to one another into that stream you're also helping to keep the stream healthier by reducing the amount of soil that gets stirred up, reducing the sedimentation that's running in there, and of course, reducing the amount of manure that is hitting that stream. So all of those are going to be ways you can help improve the health of your animals and your farm. So if you do have a stream that needs to be fenced off, please, please, please contact your local conservation district or the NRCS to see if you are eligible for cost share programs and see if you can get that taken care of. That's going to help you in the long run. And it's also going to create extra paddocks for you for rotational grazing so that you can better manage your nutrient status in the fields and keep your grasses healthier as well. So there's a lot of pluses to that. Another thing you want to avoid, and it's something that we see a lot, is you don't want to feed more than one bale in the same spot in one feeding season. So a lot of us have a particular path that we go down, we drop a bale and go back to the barn and you're done. But what that does is that creates a lot of high traffic in that area, and cows, if you haven't noticed, aren't very light. And so with each push of that hoof into the ground, you are compacting that soil, and soil compaction takes years to undo. So every time you are compacting that soil, especially when the soil is wet, it's more susceptible to compaction. Every time they step, you are reducing the productivity of that land. So you want to make sure you spread out how much they're stepping. Now, I'm not going to say if everything is wet that you should keep them moving around, because then you're going to destroy everything. So this is definitely, you have to look at your land, and every day is going to be different. Every farm is going to be different. So, but in general, you want to try to spread out those hay bales throughout the farm so that you can not have just one paddock that is super destroyed and non-functional, where you have another area that is nutrient short. And so you want to spread those nutrients out. Again, a lot of that is based on the soil, whether or not it's frozen, whether or not it's dry. So do take that into the plan as well. He recommends that you rotate feeding areas across your hay fields in a 4 to 6 year cycle. All right. And also, if it's wet and muddy, put that bale in a feeder. That's going to reduce the amount of hay loss. If it's dry and frozen, you can unroll the bales, and that's going to spread out that manure even more and give you a nice uniform spread of the manure. But also, don't winter feed on wet soils that can't handle that animal traffic. I've been talking about that a lot today. It's really important, not only to the compaction in the soil, but also when your animals are standing in mud, they are using more energy. It takes them a lot more energy to move around. It's also going to help increase the potential for disease like foot rot. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your animals out of the mud as much as possible. By reducing that, you're going to reduce the amount of extra energy you need to feed them through grain supplements. And also it's going to help keep, like I said, those diseases at bay. All right. So also, if you have a wet area, wait till it freezes and then let the animals in there. And if it's a wet area, wait for that summer drought to return those nutrients to that field. But we do need to try to plan for the weather that we have. We're going to see a lot more volatility, a lot more potential moisture and humidity in this region. So let's start planning for that and just basically have that safety card in our pocket.
COVID-19 vaccination protects you and those around you. When communities are vaccinated, fewer people get sick. Community immunity begins with each one of us. Visit vaccinate.wv.gov to learn more about COVID-19 vaccination.
All right. So now if you would like some information on how to space those bales, I'd be happy to share some data with you that Dr. Rayburn has put together for us. You just need to contact me at the extension office or by email. And my email is Karen.Cox, that's COX, at mail.wvu.edu. But I do want you to consider this. The economic value of conserving nutrients in hay, pasture, and supplemental feeds varies from year to year, but averages about $1 a day for every 1,000 pounds of livestock fed. So for 30 head of cows, this is about $3,700 for a 100-day feeding period. Your management that keeps fertilizer nutrients where they do the most good simply makes economic sense. And to further that, we have an example. There's a gentleman in Kentucky that has been using bale grazing. He runs about 35 head of cattle, and he rotates his animals into new bales and stockpiled grass twice a week. So this is twice a week he's moving his animals into a new pasture or a new paddock. And he uses hot wired fence. So basically it's that little thin poly wire that you just pick up and stick in the ground. It's fairly easy to do. And there are a lot of farmers here in West Virginia that have taken this strategy and run with it and are doing very well with it. So this gentleman in Kentucky is using the hot wired fence, and he moves the animals twice a month. And he says that prior to doing it this way, his cows were in mud from October or November through April. And, that is not good for the animals, and it's not good for the land. Also keep in mind that those low-lying paddocks are more susceptible to flooding. So if we get high waters or a flash flood, you're going to have more of an opportunity for that manure to go someplace that it's not supposed to be, like a waterway. All right, and just like West Virginia, Kentucky gets a lot of winter wetness. And so he has found that the stack pads or the winter feedlots that we have that are geotextile material and gravel to help limit that mud, well, those are A, pretty expensive to install, and B, if you are renting your pasture, if you have a lease to pasture your animals there, a lot of times your landowner isn't going to be interested in putting that kind of an investment in. And so this is a technique to get around that option for winter feeding that's healthier for the land and for the animals. He says, so don't be sure you're not putting your bales too close together because that's going to increase the animal traffic. And he found success by stockpiling grasses as well as putting the bales out. He spread them 50 feet apart. So that made the fencing a little harder to move around. But with that polywire fence, it's pretty easy to move once you get the hang of it. And once you get the animals trained that that's what they're doing today, that they're moving today. And they do pick up on that. And the mamas can teach the babies too. So he observed his electric bill decreased $30 a month in the winter just from not plugging in his tractors. And he also estimated his fuel bill for diesel went down significantly. But his system, he allows the animals to have 4 bays of hay at a time, and they typically clean them up within 3 to 4 days before having access to new hay. He uses bale rings to help limit the hay waste, and he estimates that through this system, he has reduced his hay by 32%. So look at how much you're paying for hay, and think about reducing that number by 32%, and let me know if you're interested in giving this a shot. So he reduced 125 round bales each winter. This is for 35 head of cattle, down to 85 bales. So you want to make sure that you're looking at how this is going to impact your land. Also, if you're feeding good quality hay because you have good nutrients in the soil, that's less grain you're going to have to buy to help supplement the energy needs of those animals. He's also saving in fertilizer. He doesn't have to fertilize as much. Now, he did want to point out that when it's bad in the winter, there will be damage to existing forage stands. So when you are trying to select where you're going to graze these animals in the winter, do pick the fields that need some reseeding anyway, because you will need to reseed come spring. Anyway, consider the value of your time when you're looking at this, but also, there's something that a lot of farmers don't consider when they are figuring out their work plan. And that is when you are running that tractor, not only is it taking time and fuel and potentially compacting the soil, but also it's going to be affecting your hearing. When you are running a tractor at full throttle, you're looking at about over 120 decibels, and anything louder than 90 decibels, especially for an extended period of time, will damage your inner ear. It's going to damage that to the point where you will lose your hearing. Now, there are things you can do like earplugs and earmuffs, but I don't see enough of you guys or gals out there wearing those when you're on your tractor. So do consider wearing hearing protection when you are out in the field feeding your animals. A little tiny pair of foam earplugs is so easy and convenient. You can hang them on the steering wheel. They have a string and you just hang them over there so it reminds you to put them on every time you start up that tractor. You'll still hear stuff, but it will reduce the decibel level and help to protect your hearing for the long run. And with that, I am out of time, and I hope you will join us again next week.
COVID-19 vaccines are available to West Virginians in all 55 counties. To find COVID-19 vaccines near you, visit vaccinate.wv.gov. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 info line at 1-833-793-0965. Again, that's vaccinate.wv.gov or 1-833-793-0965 to find your COVID-19 vaccine. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.